Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Shang Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. I'm seeing this a little out of order actually, because I ended up getting to see Eternals before this, so I'm not going to theaters right now, and I couldn't really get a good copy of this until it came to Disney Plus. That's why I'm reviewing it now. In a lot of ways, I think what works about this movie is that it is very entertaining, fun, big blockbuster movie. It works. You're going to leave kind of overall satisfied with this film. It's not a perfect film, and I wouldn't call it a great film or a great Marvel film or anything like that. It has a lot of good things about it, particularly the actors in it, from Simu Lee and especially Tony Leung in, to my understanding, his English language debut, definitely his American film debut, despite being in so many great films over the years. Not sure what took everybody so long, but whatever. And in general, like, mostly complaints I have about Hollywood doing martial arts movies, which I sound like a broken record for, and I think this does a better job at it, but still makes me question why they don't just hire a martial arts director when they make these films. I feel like a lot of these guys would be totally down for a bigger budget. But this movie at its core, with Shang Chi, which is basically about a guy, Shang Chi, played by Simu Liu, who has hidden out, run away from his father, who is this guy who has the 10 rings. He's been alive for 1,000 years. He destroys all this stuff, and he wants to get this necklace from his son that was from his mother, who is since deceased, and basically go into this weird other dimension sort of thing. But he has a lot of issues with his father, training him to be an assassin, sort of not being there for him after his mother's death. Kind of the core of this movie is a father-son relationship, and a lot of this film and the most memorable parts of it are about that. But I think this film, Shang-Chi the movie, this first movie, I guess, has its biggest issue is, I know Marvel, after they made Iron Man, they used the structure of Iron Man. Like, if you see Doctor Strange, it's feels very Iron Man-ish. They don't want to do your typical origin story. They sort of want to do a different sort of thing. They don't want to be samey with it. They don't want you to be too expecting of that. And although I think they've done that in better ways, like you look at the Guardians of the Galaxy, the first Guardians of the Galaxy, you look at Spider-Man Homecoming, things like that, as a first movie, they're not having to deal with the origin thing. In Shang-Chi, obviously, we've never seen this guy in a Marvel movie before, so you sort of have to do that, but they're so against kind of doing their normal thing where they primarily set up the character and have some silly villain or something, that you get this sort of film where you can tell they didn't want to make the same kind of movie, but I don't fully think they knew what to do without that structure, which, had they just done the Iron Man structure, primarily these films are to sell Simu Liu as Shang-Chi and sell that character and his portrayal of that character. But when I think back on this film, I think of Tony Leung, and I think of how this story falls apart because him and Tony Leung having a fight and having a blowout towards the end, which they have, but towards the end, at the end, I'm looking at them fighting dragons, and I'm where the fuck did this come from? It just felt like they were the building blocks of a much more interesting movie that gets kind of thrown around the room because they don't exactly understand, or this movie thinks creatively that's a smarter idea. But in a sense, I think this film was an overly complicated, fairly simple feeling film. And if you look at, most martial arts films, they would just go down to the core elements and have two people fight and it'd be really cool. But they didn't do that because they didn't hire a martial arts director. I complained about this with Mortal Kombat this past year, but I still complain about it because it just feels like Hollywood's missing the point, and it feels like they're missing the point by just not paying out the people they should. Why wouldn't you get a martial artist director for this? I think some of the fight scenes are great. The bus scene that you've seen in all the ads, the end fight scene, there's various ones that are really wonderful, but it doesn't sing the way a martial arts director would, and you can tell, they just got some indie director to do this, and that's cool, but maybe you should find a director who's appropriate, which used to be Feige's thing and Marvel's thing. They'd always find a director who is perfect for that kind of thing, and I feel like they're mixing and matching a little bit to who they think is controllable or whatever. That is disappointing. But I think like the Tony Leung thing, that is a huge get for Marvel or any studio that was able to actually pull this off. It's weird seeing him speak in English. I've never seen that before. I don't remember that ever happening before. He has an English accent because he's from Hong Kong, but he was really great. Tony Leung is probably one of the better Marvel villains. At first I was like, I don't know, let's not go too crazy, but then I like thought about it and rewatched some things. I was like, I mean, he is really great. You do get a sense of like how scary he is, how many complications, like there's very few actors that can show with a look that the character that they're portraying is thinking so much, which I felt a lot in this. And he can sell like a pretty dopey film. Like if they had like, you know, Malekith from Thor: The Dark World or something, this movie wouldn't work as well. Tony Leung almost steals the whole movie, really. Like he's who I think of more. Now Simu Liu, who I'm a big Kim's Convenience fan, I know his work very well. I don't think this film was as concerned with selling him, and I think that was sort of one of the stranger things this film does, because it's like I sort of get like it'll be cool to watch him interact with other people in the Marvel universe. Like I definitely get that from this. But it wasn't so much it sold me on the character. It was like, I feel like I just watched the first Thor movie, and while I was watching the movie, I felt more so, oh, it'll be cool to watch him play off Robert Downey Jr. than I liked the character. And this just didn't give me enough time with him. I was like surprised, like, why don't you give me more time with Simu Liu? Like, you have this, you know, guy who is charismatic and works, but like, it felt like I sort of didn't get to know him, because they're trying to show me so much other world building with this character, which like I get, but it almost feels like more of what a sequel should be than like a first movie. But because Marvel's been around, this is the 25th installment, I guess that's what we get from it. Awkwafina's fine, but another thing is like they kept doing this thing anytime the film would get serious, like on the bus fight, there was a guy who's like live streaming it on his Instagram live, and they kept cutting to him, and it wasn't funny. And although that video went on to do something else, it's like you didn't need to go to him so much. I felt the same way with Ben Kingsley's in this film. I guess that's a spoiler. He just like would undermine huge moments, and it's like, haha, he's funny, but like, what was the point of a lot of that stuff, really? And it feels like in this film, there's oftentimes it feels like it's doing something because it's supposed to do it, not because the narrative wants them to do it, not because the story warrants it. It's just because this kind of a budget big thing should do that, and that got kind of distressing. I think this is a good film, Shang Chi and the Ten Rings. I like this film, but I do think there's no way to watch if you know anything about martial arts cinema and think this is like, you know, competent to that. Is it a good shake for Hollywood? Yeah, but like that's like I don't care, and like maybe they could have tried a little harder. Like I'm sort of sick of like acting like I should just settle for this, you know, but I'm excited. Like I hope they get a better director for the next one. This director was fine, I guess. It's just the story really doesn't work, and like you really start to think about it, you're like, why didn't I get a couple more scenes with this person so they could have like this big special effects thing, which is like I don't think anyone really cares about at this point. I see so many of these things in big movies, the CGI fest, that you're just kind of sitting there like, I mean, is this a thing I care at all about? Is this going to change anything for me? Is this going to make a connection with me? And I feel like that is one thing I will say this film doesn't have. Marvel's really good at its characters making a connection to you, so you almost feel like you need to see it. And this felt like, and even Eternals feels like they're kind of resting on their laurels, which is cool, but I wonder how often they can really do that. I don't feel like everyone has a huge love for the Shang-Chi character. I feel like he needs that moment where he really grabs this, and most people are probably saying it because, you know, oh hey, it's the next Marvel movie or whatever. It's more of just a film with good intentions that got a little too off the rails, but not so much this film is unwatchable, or I wouldn't say it's a bad movie. It's just like competently fine. It has some more interesting parts about it, but I just wish this director really knew more, or they got a director who knew how to make a martial arts film. This is more inspired by that and less like whatever the fuck it's doing with this superhero thing that didn't entirely really work. You know, it's like you can't kind of change what these films are about, and I think these films are kind of character studies, and they can be that. And I notice it is trying to gear away from it, but if it's going to, it has to maybe have some more of a theory other than like, what if this thing but different, because the origin story thing is just not cool anymore. And I wish it had found a way to either just go, well, we have to make this cool because we have to get this guy to work. I kind of wish they had done that instead of what they did. But I sort of like that they attempted something. There is a lot to like about this film. It's not a film you can like I didn't feel you could outright hate, especially because this was just made because Marvel couldn't get the rights to like Kung Fu with David Carradine or something. It's a decently fine Marvel movie. It's pretty middle of the road. It does have a few moments that sort of stick out to you, but I don't think it's one we're going to be maybe as obsessed over going forward. I do hope for the future. I do like Simu in this. I think he can do probably cooler stuff in other movies or a sequel, and I'm excited for that. But as for this film, it just felt like they were, instead of doing a typical origin movie thing that everyone would have criticized them for, they ended up going in this other direction and not really understanding the purpose of what they were doing, which Marvel movies are, in a sense, to present this character to the larger world. And this film was far more concerned with world building and doing other things than actually doing that, which to me almost feels like a failure to what the studio does so well. I hope Samulu gets that in other incarnations and other spin-offs and whatever, but right now it just feels like someone who's trying to be different, and in their attempt at trying to be different, they sort of sadly kind of lost the point of how a studio makes these type of things and why these characters pop for people. And without knowing that fully, I feel like they didn't give us the Shang-Chi film maybe we needed. They gave us the Shang-Chi film that they felt they needed, and that feels a little disappointing. So if you've seen Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.